the Black struggle set a model not only for other racial and ethnic groups that had been subject to the same conditions, but a model that was also to some extent taken up by the feminist movement and by the gay rights movement. All these movements together brought about a change in the American people, a change in consciousness about identity and rights, led indirectly to new immigration laws and infusions of new immigrants, changed the ideas that younger generations, and I say particularly of women, had about how they wanted to live their lives. And at the same time, the United States has institutions that are very, very hard to change.
From the days of Martin Luther King, W.E.B. Du Bois, Margaret Mead, and Eleanor Roosevelt, to recent conversations of inequality, race, justice, and media, the Forum has carried forward a proud tradition, bringing together people to think critically about the moral contradictions and possibilities of our time. Tonight, we continue that storied tradition with a conversation titled American Contradiction, Revolution, and Revenge from the 1950s to now with Paul Starr. How did Americans come to elect Barack Obama and then Donald Trump? Those choices capture what Paul Starr calls the American contradiction. The whole truth about America, Starr argues, in this new history of the United States since the 1950s, has never been contained in one consistent set of values or interests. Our nation was born in the contradiction between freedom and slavery. Today, it is beset by a contradiction between a changing people and a resisting nation, a nation with entrenched institutions that have empowered those who fear the changes and look to restore an old America of their imagining. This topic couldn't be more timely. Across our history, moments of democratic expansion have often been followed by backlash, by efforts to reclaim lost privilege or rewrite the meaning of freedom itself. This tension between progress and retrenchment, revolution and revenge, is woven into the American story, and it continues to shape our political and cultural life today. We are so fortunate to have with us Paul Starr, Pulitzer Prize-winning Princeton University historian and sociologist and prolific writer whose work has illuminated the evolution of American institutions, from healthcare and media to democracy itself. This marks Paul Starr's third appearance at Ford Hall Forum. It is so wonderful to welcome you back to this podium, Paul. Mm-hmm. A testament to its enduring insight into the nation's unfinished experiment with equality and power. In conversation with him is Randall L. Kennedy, the Michael R. Klein professor at Harvard Law School, the author of 6 books, one of the most incisive voices on race, law, and the paradoxes of American liberalism. His work challenges us to look unflinchingly at both our ideals and our failures. Together, Professors Starr and Kennedy will explore how the revolution of the past 70 years, civil rights, gender equality, and the cultural liberation have generated both profound progress and fierce reaction. Their dialogue promises not just historical reflection, but urgent relevance for the present moment. It is now my sincere pleasure to welcome Paul Starr and Randall Kennedy. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the generous introduction. And first thing I want to do is congratulate Professor Starr on a wonderful book. I've talked with him during the years, at least some of the years in which he was writing it, and it's wonderful to see its realization. Let's get right to it. First, why don't you tell us what's your basic thesis?
Okay, well, thank you, Randy, for taking part in this, and thanks to the Ford Hall Forum for arranging it. And so the central motivating question behind the book is the one that's already been mentioned. How did Americans come to elect Barack Obama and then elect Donald Trump? So before Obama was elected, many people thought, I count myself as one of them, that Americans would not elect a black man president. And before Donald Trump was elected, many of us also thought that nobody with his kind of background would ever occupy the White House, much less knock down one of its wings. And so these were things that we thought were impossible beforehand, but they happened. And in considering this, I guess I had to acknowledge that there was something I had missed about the country. I think that many people had missed about its potential for surprise. These were unexpected things, but in both cases, once they happened, there was a recognition that they reflected deep and abiding forces in our history. The America of Obama, the America of Trump, these were not just accidents. They came from forces that extended all the way back in our history. In the book, I talk about this country having been born in the contradiction between freedom and slavery. And those forces have appeared in different forms through our history. The conflict has taken different shapes, but we're still living with it. And many of us thought during the Civil Rights Movement and later, we thought some of these forces in our past had been overcome. And now we have to recognize they haven't been overcome. And we're still fighting the battles that our forebears have fought.
The word surprise came up in your comments. While you were writing this book, were you surprised with various things that you encountered?
Well,
ideas, information, figures.
Yeah. So I didn't enter into writing this book with a preset understanding of all the elements that I would have to deal with. In fact, I had to learn about a lot of things that I knew very little about, but felt I needed to incorporate into the book. So let me just mention one of those things. This book has a great deal about racial conflict, and it also has a lot about gender-related issues. And I talk about the development of the feminist movement and about what was originally the gay rights movement, 1960s, 1970s. These were not things I had written about before. But in order to write this book, I needed to understand these things a lot better. I learned a lot in the course of writing the book. these were surprising things to me, and I think they'll be surprising to readers. Let me just mention one thing that I think especially younger generations would find surprising. Who was more likely to vote for the Equal Rights Amendment when it was first brought up, and who was more likely to vote for the Civil Rights Act in 1964? Democrats or Republicans? Well, actually, it was Republicans more than Democrats. And so one of the themes that runs through the book has to do with the transformation of the Republican Party. And that was not something I expected to write about or even to approach in the way that I did. But there was a substantial progressive tradition within the Republican Party. Who was the Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court in its most liberal days? Earl Warren. And who had Earl Warren been? The 3 times elected Republican governor of California and the Republican Party's vice presidential candidate in 1948. He might well have been the candidate in 1952 had not somebody with an even greater reputation, the former commander of U.S. forces, Dwight Eisenhower, entered the race. And Warren wasn't really an atypical figure. There were great divisions within the Republican Party, but there was this substantial progressive tradition in the Republican Party. And really what happened over the course of these roughly, we're talking about 3/4 of a century, is 2 transformations of the Republican Party. First, the transformation that involved Reagan and the defeat of the progressive Republican wing, and so it became a more consistently conservative party. But then the second transformation from Reagan to Trump, which is an equally great, perhaps even greater transformation, in which a lot of what used to be conservatism has been completely, I'm tempted to say betrayed, certainly abandoned. And so you asked what was a surprise? I hadn't really thought through how central to this whole history the Republican Party's transformations had been. So I guess I began by thinking of this more in terms of what liberals and Democrats had done, and then as I confronted the history, I really had to bring in much more centrally what the different movements on the right had done.
I think it's a really strong point of the Republican Party. I mean, Wendell Willkie, Tom Dewey, Richard Nixon. I mean, if you think about Richard Nixon in 1960, I mean, his civil rights record was probably better than John F. Kennedy's. But now it's hard for us to think about that given what the Republican Party has become. Let me ask you this. In your history, so you talk, 1950 to the present. Best president in that period, from 1950 to now? Who would be the best president in your view?
I don't like to play this ranking game. I mean, in terms of, who got the most done, well, that would have to be Lyndon Johnson. But what do you mean by best? I mean,
in your view, in terms of performing being the head of the executive branch of the federal government, which person occupying that place did you admire most as you were writing this book?
Well, I can tell you who I didn't admire more easily than I could tell you who I did admire.
Tell me that, but then I'm going to go back to my question.
Someone who comes in for more harsh treatment than I think I felt originally is Jimmy Carter. Because a lot of what people attribute to Reagan in the 1980s actually began under Carter. And also Carter came in with Democratic majorities in Congress nearly as large as Richard Nixon, as Lyndon Johnson in 1964. And yet he achieved so little and ended up reversing his positions on taxes and so many other things. And really, I think, failed to deliver to the public. So there's on the other side. Um, um, uh, I really hesitate to identify anybody, but here, let me just give you another case where I had to revise my own thinking, and that is the case of Richard Nixon.
Mm-hmm.
So Nixon certainly courted the forces of backlash in order to get elected, and I think a lot of his rhetoric has influenced the way people remember him, understand him, and of course, the disgrace of Watergate hangs over him. If you look at the actual policies that Nixon carried out as president, they were surprisingly liberal, so he was more responsible than either Kennedy or Johnson for actually bringing about school integration in the South. He's the one who introduced affirmative action in the private employment sector. And most of the environmental legislation that we look back to, occupational health and safety legislation, most of that was passed under Nixon and signed by Nixon. And of course, he proposed a more generous national health insurance program than any subsequent Democrat dared endorse. Also favored a nationally guaranteed income that he nearly got enacted in Congress. None of these things agree with the perception of Nixon. So again, in the process of doing this work for the book, I needed to deal with a lot of complications that other people might have easily put aside.
On the question of Jimmy Carter, the headline for your chapter tells the story. The Democrats squandered opportunity, and it was a very tough. Your paragraphs are very tough on Jimmy Carter. I know that you wanted to resist, but I'm gonna press you. You've mentioned Carter, you've mentioned Nixon. Your book is, the contradiction is how could the American people elect Barack Obama and then elect Donald Trump? You're very tough on Donald Trump, and we'll get to the Donald Trump in a minute. What's your assessment of Barack Obama as president of the United States?
So let me talk about all three Democratic presidents from the 1990s to the present.
Okay.
In each case, they came in and faced a challenge of repair. It was a question of a recession for Clinton. It was the economic crisis, the financial crisis for Obama, and then it was the pandemic for Joe Biden. And so in each case, they came in and within 2 years, each of them lost control of Congress, despite the fact that I think in each case they did a pretty good job of repair, but they were never able to carry out the larger ambitions that Democrats held out for them, and had to make compromises and often failed in ways that I think greatly damaged the Democratic Party over the long run. So I didn't want to just treat Obama in isolation from what was really what's really been the pattern over roughly the past 30 years, and so I can't talk about this without mentioning the fact that I did work in the Clinton White House in the first year of Bill Clinton's first term, and was involved in one of those failures, the failure of healthcare reform. That I think the lessons of that failure were necessary in order for Obama to have passed the Affordable Care Act in 2010. Because that initial failure established a lot of the limits of what would be feasible later on. Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is a much more limited reform than we had attempted under Clinton. But it made some significant progress. Millions of additional people were able to get health care coverage, and the Republican charges that this would lead to higher costs really have not turned out to be true. And now, what is happening at the moment is a retreat from those advances under Trump and the Republican Congress today, and a great many people are going to find themselves back in the situation that existed beforehand.
Talk to us about the race question. You talk a good bit in your book.
Yes.
About race. I mean, it's throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the cover of the book.
Yes.
I mean, it's one of the major threads.
Okay.
What about the race question?
All right. Okay.
And there's one other thing. I mean, in your discussion of Obama, I think that people, when I was reading it, I had, if I ever knew, I had forgotten both of Obama's victories not get the majority of the white vote. In fact, he went down. Mm-hmm. It's very striking. I mean, he won because people of color, Asian Americans, Latinos, blacks, really just overwhelmingly came out for him. Mm-hmm. But if it had simply been the white vote, he would have lost both times. It seems that race is very central to this American contradiction. Tell us about it.
Okay. All right. So let's go back. The argument is for what's happened over this period since the 1950s is that the force that broke up the political equilibrium of the post-World War II era, that force was the Black freedom struggle. Mm-hmm. Not only because of the challenge that it made to the legacies of slavery and Jim Crow, but because it set a model. In fact, the title of that chapter there toward the beginning is called Black Americans Model Minority. Mm-hmm. Not a model minority in the sense that that's been used for Asian Americans, but a model in the sense of collective struggle, confronting the legacies of the past, the continuing forms of racism. And that model was, in part, it was a model about strategy and tactics. It was a model about legal claims that got established partly through court decisions, but also through the Civil Rights Act. A cultural model of asserting pride after a long history of being subject to marginalization and shame and so forth. And so all these different ways, the Black struggle set a model not only for other racial and ethnic groups that had been subject to the same conditions, but a model that was also to some extent taken up mm-hmm. by the feminist movement and by the gay rights movement. And so there was this general challenge to all these traditional hierarchies, uh, white over black, men over women, straight over queer. And those challenges then had other consequences. As I say in the book, the black struggle was rooted in the black church. It was not, there was no intention to challenge religion as such, but because of the way this unfolded, it created a new political alignment in religious terms, and so a lot of the traditional ideals that Americans had held came into question. There's no surprise that there was a backlash against all this. That was true from the very beginning. But I suggest in the book that it led to an even more fundamental disruption. And so the argument is that there was a change, that all these movements together brought about a change in the American people, a change in consciousness about identity and rights, led indirectly to new immigration laws and infusions of new immigrants, changed the ideas that younger generations, and I say particularly of women, had about how they wanted to live their lives. And at the same time, the United States has institutions that are very, very hard to change. We have a constitution, an 18th century constitution that is extremely difficult to amend. We have a political party system. We have the same two parties. Well, in other democracies, often change over the party system. We are kind of locked into the kind of two-party system we have. There are a whole series of other ways in which the United States is kind of locked into certain institutional patterns. So we have had, and you might say, well, the American people and the nation are the same, but in this period, we had people who were changing in many ways, but national institutions that didn't change. And those who were most afraid of the changes taking place in the American people have latched onto the symbolism of the nation, have made the nation their basis of opposition, claiming patriotism and embracing the symbols of the nation to fight these changes that are taking place in identity and consciousness and so forth. So that's kind of the larger, so that's the argument that this earlier contradiction, going back to the founding, drawn on racial lines, had now morphed into, had now taken on new significance in this recent period. Now, coming back to Obama. Okay, so I think when Obama was elected, many people took that as an indication that these demographic changes and these cultural changes were leading inevitably to political change. And indeed, there was a great deal of discussion from the 1990s on about whites becoming a minority. And so you had this change in not just the actual change that was taking place demographically, but also this change in perception of what would be the dominant groups, what would be the dominant political party, the idea that this could have a tipping effect and lead to, just to pick a phrase, an emerging Democratic majority. And so for many people on the left, liberals, progressives, there was a sense that, oh, the wind was at our backs and there's going to be this kind of inevitable triumph. But of course, for people on the right, there was a fear of a kind of impending catastrophe. And I think that fear had enormous ramifications and created this sense of desperation and the willingness to, just to jump all the way ahead, the willingness to embrace somebody like Donald Trump.
Yeah. Having written this book and traversed this history that you've just now briefly described, do you still have faith in, quote, the people, end quote? And I'm gonna, on page 355, you're talking about, it's in a chapter, Trump's restoration. You're talking about what are the circumstances under which Donald Trump won the White House for a second time? And in discussing this, you point out that actually it was close. I mean, he won. There's no two ways about that. But it's not like it was a big landslide. It was a close election. But you then go on to say you're talking about the forces that allowed him to get back, and you talk about how you say you're quoting an analyst in Britain's Financial Times, and this person says, and you embrace it. Ultimately, voters don't distinguish between unpleasant things that their leaders and governments have direct control over and those things that are outside. And then you say, the tendency of voters is to throw out incumbents when bad things happen, regardless of their responsibility for the misfortune. You say that just this happens. This is just the way it is. And my question is, I understand that being the way it is, but so you mean to tell me that in a circumstance where people have in their face someone who has said what Donald Trump said, who has not just in a campaign, he was president of the United States for 4 years. You saw how he acted during the pandemic.
Mhm.
You saw what he said. He talked about, yeah, you put me back in there, vengeance, retribution, all of that. And because of, problems, some inflation, some this, some that, a sufficient number of people were willing, because of their frustration, to put him back in office. To me, I'm still trying to grapple with it. It makes me want to reconsider little d democracy. What say you?
Well, I'm not going to reconsider democracy. It's an imperfect system. Um, it's not always true that the best candidate wins. Um, the people make mistakes and don't always choose good leaders. We have an unending battle. There's no guarantee, and there's a lot of there's some degree luck that's involved.
Hmm?
So, by the way, I don't attribute the 2024 election results entirely to inflation, the
No?
inflation that happened under Biden. Although I think that, what happened, if you look internationally, incumbents all over the world uh, were losing elections. Um, and this is regardless of what party they were in. I mean, sometimes it would be, a party of the right that would be blamed, and sometimes it would be a party of the left. So there's, to some extent, there's a kind of random factor involved in elections. Again, I'm not saying that's the whole explanation, but we have to accept that democracy is imperfect, and people will sometimes draw the wrong conclusions. They experience inflation. They have pocketbook problems. Perhaps they don't feel, in this case, they don't feel that Kamala Harris was really going to answer those questions. Maybe it was as much her fault as it was the circumstances of the time, the inability to, effectively communicate what she could do to remedy those real problems. And then you just can't just look at it, I think, from the standpoint of what happened immediately before any election. And this is a more general point. Uh, I don't think we can answer this question that I raised at the beginning how did the country come to elect Obama? How did it come to elect Trump? I don't think we can answer that by just looking at the voting data in each of those elections. There's a bigger story here. And so we have to kind of step back. And one way to think about what's happened over these many decades is that we had these movements that pursued very successfully, I think, greater social equality, that sought to break down these traditional forms of hierarchy and domination that had existed for a very, very long time. But in this same period, we had rising economic inequality. We had the decline of unions. We had, in general, um, uh, greater power for people at the very top. It affected tax rates. It affected all kinds of laws. There's a chapter in this book, about the counter-revolution through the courts and about many things that were happening very quietly that didn't get a lot of attention, that undermined the position of working people. So this is going on for a long time, and there were legitimate reasons for working people to be upset, and to be upset with the Democratic Party, which hadn't done a lot about these problems. So all of that background stands behind each of these elections. It's not just what happens immediately before. The inflation, I think, did matter. There are a lot of things like that happen and that lead people to make certain judgments that influence the outcome of the election. By the way, we can see just this past November, in the races that took place in New York City, in New Jersey, in Virginia, a lot of the people who did vote for Trump seem to have turned around and voted for Democrats. It's not clear how deep those votes, that, especially when you look at the districts with a lot of Hispanic voters, there seems to have been a very considerable shift back. So that's partly why I don't want us to focus altogether on one election and the voting patterns and to draw conclusions about what the future is going to be as a result of that. We need to have a longer point of view, and that's what I try to present in this book.
Your book, again, American Contradiction, Revolution, and Revenge.
Yeah.
Revenge, and the revenge is coming from the highest political officer in the country. I don't recall another time, certainly not in my lifetime, where revenge has been such a central feature
Yes.
of an administration. Your book, I mean, it has a certain, you certainly don't pull punches. There's certainly, you certainly chronicle distress, but in many ways, your book is hopeful in the following. So you say, there will be mistakes made, but implicitly you're saying, but there'll be another time. Mistake might have been made this time, but there'll be another time. A question. Given the way things are now, I take it that you don't think that the American people have made yet a lethal mistake. You talk, because you talk about unending struggle, which suggests that, well, there's struggle. You'll win, you'll lose, you'll win, you'll lose, but the beat will go on. I think there's some people who wonder whether we have hit a point at which the beat might not go on. Are those people being alarmist?
No, I don't think they're being alarmist. I do think there is a risk of a kind of self-perpetuating government, a risk of authoritarianism. We can see that in many of the things that Trump has done. His seizure of powers that belong to Congress his use of the military, sending troops into cities on pretext that disorder in those cities demanded it. So there are real dangers and signs of problems. And I think Trump has shown us really problems with our constitutional system. Almost every day you read about some pardon that Trump has issued. And so you have this potential of a president telling subordinates to do things that are illegal and promising them pardons. And under the Supreme Court's presidential immunity decision, he couldn't be prosecuted. And if he uses the pardon power, then his subordinates can't be prosecuted. I mean, there is a real problem here with the unlimited pardon power and with Trump's ability to assume powers that and to defy constitutional norms at a time when the Supreme Court is not stopping him from doing these things. So we are at a very difficult moment. As difficult as that is, I wouldn't want anybody to draw the conclusion that that the situation is hopeless, that there's nothing that can be done. And that's why at the very end of the book, I talk about the need for new popular movements and new institutions to repair the damage that Trumpism is doing, and to meet the real crises that lie ahead with technological change, the changes with artificial intelligence, economic changes, climate change, and so forth. The things that really ought to be at the center of our politics have been driven out. And instead, we have to meet the challenge that Trump represents.
Let me read the last couple of sentences of your book, and then I want to ask a question about that, a follow-up. But, quote, "If Americans are to do in the 21st century what they did in the 20th, if they are to live in a democracy with any hope of liberty and justice for all, if they are to establish a more perfect union, they will have to create new popular movements and new institutions capable of repairing the damage from Trumpism and from the shocks that lie ahead. It is not too early to start thinking about what forms those movements and institutions should take," end quote. That's right. It's not too early. So let's hear from you what some early preliminary thinking might be on that issue.
So that
what
was
is to be done.
So that was an invitation for many people to think about these problems. It was not to suggest that I had in my back pocket a solution to all these problems. And I want to just emphasize one thing about this book. This book is a history. It doesn't have a final chapter in which I provide all the answers, because honestly, I don't have them. And but one reason I wrote it is because it's hard to make sense of the things that have happened in our recent history. When I think back to the America that I grew up in after the Second World War, it was so radically different from the America that we have today. So explaining how we got from that America to this America, that seemed to me important enough for me to address in one book. And the next phase, and I said earlier, one thing we should take from the election of both Obama and Trump is that this country is capable of surprises. And we have to believe that it's capable of some good surprises. There's no other way for us to operate if we don't have the belief that there is a possibility to get back to a sense of fairness and decency, and to uphold the traditional values that many of us identify with this country. And so we just have to summon whatever power we have to fight that battle.
The floor is open to questions, comments, and by all means, objections.
So in this book, you've given a wonderful textured history of lots of the things that have gone wrong and some of the things that have gone right in America. But some of the stuff that's affecting us in the United States is affecting the other countries as well. For example, the takeover of the left parties by the professional classes and issues regarding immigration. You don't talk about the things that are happening more broadly when you, in most of your, it's very America-centric. For example, race that permeates the book. Of course, race is incredibly important in Europe as well, but Europe doesn't have the kind of evil history, the deepest evil history that we have. You know, Britain was successful in outlawing slavery way too late, but did. So what is it? Why did you neglect some of these other broader issues?
Well, so
It's a long book as it is.
I had actually thought of adding a chapter about a more comparative chapter, and then realized, whoa, that's another book in itself. This is already a 400-page book, and I don't assume readers have the endurance for an 800-page book. So that's partly why it's not because I don't recognize the things that you mentioned, that these issues about immigration and economic change, that these don't just affect the United States, they come up everywhere. There is a particular history here that we have. And it does go back to slavery that distinguishes the United States from these other countries. And so it's because of that I specifically am writing about the American contradiction, the particular form that this takes given our history.
And at various points in your book, you do go comparative. So for instance, with Trump, you do point out that it wasn't just here, around the, other advanced democracies were also falling under the sway of various forces. And so, I mean, there was a comparative view from time to time. Others?
I'm curious your thoughts on voter engagement and redistricting, and whether the next election is really about that versus the parties, because you made a comment about Barack Obama actually not having the white vote, and it was the Hispanic and Black population that were the swing factor. And so rather than swing states, is it, the minority groups being the swing factor in future elections?
We may be on the verge of a very significant change that has to do with another Supreme Court decision reversing part of the Voting Rights Act that could end up denying Black people in the South almost any representation in Congress and in their state legislatures. That is a risk. I don't know whether you agree with that, whether that would happen if the court overturns Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. But you put that together with what's happening with gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering now unleashed to the max, and it's very worrisome as to whether Americans will feel that they have a reasonable chance for their votes to matter. And I think that could very well contribute to less voter engagement, to more disillusionment, more cynicism about the system. And so so even though the book doesn't have any discussion about solutions, I do think we need to consider major changes in the way we hold elections. And other countries, I think, here do provide a better model than we have historically had. But it's a whole nother subject that this book is not really about.
One thing in your book, though, that is very much related to the question and also your response was your comments in the book about the judiciary. And I mean, the two forces that, as I read it in your text, that you really focus on in terms of what brings us to this moment is the radicalization of the Republican Party, the takeover of the Republican Party by the right wing, and, in your view, the takeover of the Supreme Court of the United States by the right wing.
Yes.
And if you're talking about voting and the mechanisms for voting, how we, basic ground rules for democracy, that's the Supreme Court of the United States. And it seems that, what I get from your book is a rather dark picture, of what we can expect from the Supreme Court of the United States, which is, after all, the arbiter of the basic ground rules.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Randy. Paul, you don't emphasize economic factors quite as much as some of your colleagues do. And you mentioned in passing the fact that the Democratic Party had really ceased fighting to defend the living standards of working people. I think if you put a finer point on that, Carter, Clinton, Obama, each in different but reinforcing ways, really got into bed with Wall Street and allowed the kind of toxic aspects of capitalism that had been kept at bay by Roosevelt to resurge. And what happens when you deny ordinary people, ordinary white people, of their livelihoods, and there is a scapegoat handy, Hitler being the obvious comparison, then people who are otherwise rational are willing to vote for a madman. And that's what happened in 1933 in Germany, and that's what happened in the movement of MAGA voters for Trump. So I wonder, thinking about this, if you might give more emphasis to pocketbook factors.
Well, so I think I do in the book. There's a chapter in the book called How America Stopped Working for Working Class Americans. And I guess I see it as a combination of two things. One, a kind of tragic historical convergence. On the one hand, these movements for greater social equality, and on the other hand, an economic transformation that was happening and would have happened almost under any policy regime that had to do with the decline of manufacturing jobs. Those industries were the base of organized labor. They were crucial, those unions were crucial to offsetting the power of business. And that long-term erosion could only have been avoided if Democrats, when they had congressional majorities, had given priority to labor's interests, and they did not. I'm talking about even back under Johnson, when the issue, I don't want to get into the details, but basically the provisions of the Taft-Hartley Act from the 1940s could have been changed to have strengthened the position of unions. Unions were in decline over a very, very long period of time. And Democrats did not realize, did not recognize, did not see that the party itself depended on maintaining unions. and so that slide, I think, was central to the, to the long-term process. And then, yes, in the 90s, for example, Clinton's endorsement of NAFTA and the opening to China, those, especially the policy with respect to China, because this was after Clinton that the big effects hit with the China shock. These were devastating for a lot of working class communities, and you're entirely right that they put the blame on Democrats for having failed to defend them, and that had an immediate effect in the support for Trump in what turned out to be crucial states in 2016 in the Midwest. So the second half of the book is called Sleepwalking into Revenge. And that's part of what I mean by sleepwalking into revenge. Many centrists, it's actually the centrists who would often lose office as a consequence of it. They didn't realize that the very choices they were making would undermine their own political fortunes.
Why do you think the Democrats missed that, since it was so fundamental?
So I think there were several things that led to that pattern. And again, I'm thinking about this going all the way back to the 1960s. And one part of it has to do with the challenge that came from the new social movements. And if you live through this period, you remember the unions were seen by many people, liberals, progressives, in the civil rights movement, in the women's movement. The unions were seen as part of the problem, as part of the as part of the establishment, and indeed their racist and sexist practices were in need of change. And so there was this split that took place among progressive forces, and it had real consequences. I mentioned in the book, many unions were hit with settlements, financial settlements that they had to pay that severely weakened them. Just at the time they came under attack from the right, they came under attack from Reagan and others, and that was a kind of necessary fight that had to be had over their history, but it weakened them in the face of renewed attacks from business. So there's this real shift that takes place in the 70s with a corporate mobilization against both government and labor. And that mobilization, along with this breach that took place between progressive forces, I think that tremendously undermined the interests of working people at a crucial juncture and had long-term consequences.
So, Paul, I have a question from our Zoom audience, again, around money. So how much does the U.S. move to valuing money over everything else shape the GOP transformation? Trump appears to be fostering an oligarchy.
An oligarchy.
Yes, an oligarchy.
Okay, so, well, I think we've had a concentration of wealth at the top and a concentration of political power at the top. I'm at Trump's second inauguration. All those tech oligarchs were lined up, paying tribute. That in itself was a remarkable transformation because during the first term, a lot of the tech industry was actually resisting Trump. And what we've seen in many different quarters of business is a complete capitulation, but also an increasing partnership. And so I'm really thinking here of the changes that are taking place in the control of media, in the control of sort of key platforms, in online platforms. And what you see is increasingly I mean, thinking now in the case of CBS, for example, increasingly these are being taken over by oligarchs who are close to Trump. And that is, to me, very worrisome about an increasingly close partnership between Trump and these corporate executives.
The colloquy a moment ago between you and Bob Kuttner, I found especially poignant because, of course, you and Bob Kuttner and Robert Reich created a wonderful magazine, The American Prospect. You've devoted your lives, a big part of your lives have been devoted to progressive politics. At this moment, how do you feel? You've written this book.
Yeah.
You continue to write for the American Prospect and other outlets. You continue to be a progressive. How do you feel at this moment as a citizen of the United States who marches under the banner of liberalism?
Okay, so I guess I never thought that there was any guaranteed success. And there have been many difficult moments in American history, and there have been many difficult moments that we've lived through. And I've never thought, well, okay, that's it, we give up. It's just not the way I think it's possible to respond. And so without any illusions, we just move ahead and keep fighting.
Others, yes.
Thank you for writing the book and contributing. I had a question, and then I heard you mention Robert Reich, and I forgot that he's the co-founder of that magazine. How's he doing?
How's he doing?
Yes, he was our professor back at Northeastern with Claire Dalton. Great people. He's an amazing progressive. He was so mad under Bush. I mean, he must be really upset right now, to say the least.
Well, you can read Bob Reich online. He has many followers online. He has a new memoir out. I think he's doing as well as anybody could do with our views under these political circumstances.
The other question I have is hearing you talk about how you worked for President Clinton, and I remember that effort by it was pretty ill-advised for him to have his wife run the show with trying to transform healthcare. That was, people hated it. Nobody elected her. What is she doing? And I'm sorry you were part of it. But I wonder, what is your suggestion for tackling healthcare? Mm-hmm. People are hurting right now, and that's what's keeping Congress shut down right now, or government for that matter. What would you do? I mean, it's not like it's a secret for us to be able to resolve it. Why haven't we done it?
Oh my. Well, I've written 3 books about this, and now you've opened up an enormous discussion about what we should do about healthcare reform, and we did talk a little bit earlier about it, and about the reversal of the reforms that Obama brought about with the Affordable Care Act, and I would have preferred to see more fundamental change earlier, but I believe you have to try to deliver as much as you can, and so all along the way there have been a lot of compromises. This is going back all the way to when Medicare and Medicaid were introduced in 1965. There were a lot of compromises made at that time, and there's I'm afraid, unless there's some big revolution out there in the future, we're going to have to move ahead one step at a time. And right now, just to shift things a little bit, right now in Washington, there has been, a huge shift with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the undermining of some of the greatest progress that we've made through vaccination and other public health measures. And we face a real challenge even in maintaining the support for medical research, for science, that has benefited people enormously. So this is another situation where there's a new kind of threat. Indeed, from my point of view, thinking about this historically, this is a kind of threat which I really did not anticipate. Because it seemed for a long time that support for medical research, science, that was bipartisan. That was really not a matter of political dispute. There are differences about what kind of research, but not the question of supporting science and research. So now we have a sort of fundamental battle to fight about the way in which we're going to deal with threats to our health.
So I have time for, we have time for one final Zoom question, and then we're going to wrap it up. And the question is, you talked about needing major changes in institutions in order to preserve voters' rights and change the current political direction. But in New York City, a mayor was elected who is a leftist, and the voter turnout was the second largest in New York City history. To what do you attribute this, besides New York City being a progressive city, perhaps a candidate who was younger than 80 years old?
Well, we had actually in all three of the major elections in November, in New York City, in New Jersey, and in Virginia, we had extraordinarily high turnout for what is, an off-year election. And in particular, the New York City election, Mamdani was able to mobilize voters on a really remarkable scale. So I think people have to take notice of that, have to really try to learn the lessons for what that might mean. I don't think New York City, however, is necessarily an indication of what Democrats should be doing in Kentucky or Nebraska. This is a very diverse country, and it's not going to be the case that Mamdani's politics are going to work all over. But I really do think there are lessons from the success of his campaign. I think there are lessons also from the success that Democrats had in Virginia and New Jersey that really are quite important and actually very encouraging. We've had a lot of concern and anxiety expressed tonight, but really there's a lot to see on a positive side in these election results.
So this has been a real treat. So we have been blessed by having two of the nation's preeminent scholars here tonight, Randall Kennedy and Paul Starr. I'd love to give each of you just a few seconds to wrap up and share some final thoughts as we wind down the evening. So I'm going to start with you, Randall.
Sure, I'll be very quick. This has really been delightful. I really appreciate the forum that you've provided. Forums like this are absolutely essential. And so thank you for organizing this forum and for making this platform available. And finally, I'd like to, at the end, thank my friend, Paul Starr, for writing such a illuminating book. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Susan. I'm very appreciative of having events like this. You work for years on a book, and you never know whether people will respond to it, whether it will make any difference. And And part of the job of writing a book is actually following it up and talking to people and getting them excited. And this is a moment, I think, moment in our history when we need to think about where we've been. How did we get here? And if we're ever going to get out of it, we got to figure out how we got here. So that's why I did this, and I'm very happy that I've had this opportunity to talk about it with you.
So thank you both so very much.